I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 115. Today in the show, I'm joined by Joe Miles, a hardcore whitetail hunter from South Carolina, who's consistently found a way to kill big, mature bucks from the southeast all the way up to the Midwest, and we're exploring exactly how he's been able to do that. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. As I just mentioned, we've got Joe Miles on the show with me today, and we're going to be discussing exactly how he's had such great success across the country, whether that be in South Carolina, Illinois, or Kansas, or anywhere else. And you might be familiar with Joe as he's been featured on the Matthews Dominant Bucks TV show in the past and is currently a member of the Team 200 show, along with past podcast guest Adam Hayes. And I'll let Joe share a little more about himself in a minute, but in short, he's just someone who has had incredible success in a lot of different areas chasing big mature bucks. And my goal today is to figure out exactly how he's managed to do it. You know, what are the keys to success for a guy who's killed well over 100 deer, 4 of them grossing over 170 inches. You know, that's what we're going to try and figure out today over the next hour or two. But briefly, before we get to that, before we get Joe on the line, we need to thank our partners at Sitka Gear who make this podcast possible and take a minute to share with you our Sitka story of the day. And today's story comes from Sitka Gear's Corey Pearsall. Corey came to whitetails late in life, and at first he thought compared to chasing big game on the ground out in Montana, whitetail hunting from a tree stand would be pretty boring. That is, until he tried it.
And so I went on a hunt in Illinois, Heartland Lodge. And Matt, their head guide there, you know, we had a blast, put me in some great locations, and just opened my eyes to the environment, the world of sitting in a tree stand. Every movement makes your heart beat faster. Every sound that you hear, whether it's a squirrel, whether it's a turkey, coyote coming in, whatever it is, it just makes you excited. Whereas on the ground, spot and stalk, you don't have that you have it, you run into it, but not nearly as often as you do when you're sitting in a tree stand. And you see everything. I mean, you have 360 degrees at your fingertips. And so it goes from dead static to just like heartbeat racing, just like that. And that absolutely hooked me.
Well, Corey, you are not the only one. The electric excitement of watching a hunt unfold from a stand, that's something pretty special. And I gotta say, I'm pretty darn excited for the first opportunity this fall to experience that. It's coming fast, and I can't wait. But with all that said, if you'd like to learn more about Sitka Gear or want to create your own Sitka story someday, you can visit sitkagear.com. And now, let's get back to the show and welcome Joe Miles to the podcast. All right, with us now on the show is Joe Miles. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hey, Mark, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, although I just kind of realized that We are in a super muggy environment here in Michigan, and I did not set my AC up, so I'm cooking right now. I don't know about you, but it's warm and muggy over here.
Well, South Carolina right now is 97 degrees and about 94% humidity, so I will trade places with you whenever you are ready.
All right, I guess I can't complain. That's brutal.
It is terrible, and I wanted to shoot my bow this afternoon, and I'm going to have to wait until about 8 o'clock. I think I'm going to shoot in the dark tonight.
Yeah, that's the worst. We've had horrible humidity too, so I've been trying to exercise leading up to my elk hunt this September. So I woke up a little early, went running early in the rain, so I didn't have to be too uncomfortable, and shot my bow in the rain early this morning just so I didn't have to deal with humidity. But it's tough to avoid that this time of year.
Man, it is. I'm glad there's only about 3 months of it, especially in South Carolina. I'm ready to get out of here. I just got back from a stone sheep hunt in British Columbia, and that was a really good break, man. We had 55, 60-degree mornings, got up to in the 70s during the day, and man, that was a breath of fresh air.
Oh, I bet. I love that kind of weather. That sounds perfect. So how'd that hunt go?
It went great, man. I got a good ram. It took us 4 days to get into where we were going, and we actually spotted the ram the day before. He was about 3.5 miles away, roughly. So we actually had to pack our camp up, load back up on horses, go a full day over to get to where he was, and set up camp. Next morning, we hiked up to where he was. It took us a while, but we ended up finding that exact band of rams and shot the biggest one out of that band on opening day. So could not be happier.
Wow, that's exactly how you want it to happen.
Yeah, and that never happens for me, Mark. I'm always the absolute last second of the hunt. But it was my turn to get one on opening day.
Every once in a while, it happens. I live for those every once in a while moments, I guess. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So can you share with us exactly what it is that you do that allows you to go on these kinds of hunts and chase whitetails as much as I know you do, and maybe share a little bit more of your background too about how you got to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously grew up in South Carolina, played a lot of baseball, and actually went to college on a baseball scholarship and tore my shoulder up and wasn't able to keep playing. But my baseball was a real passion, but probably my biggest passion, like a lot of young guys, was hunting. You know, I grew up hunting with my dad in the swamps of South Carolina, and that really was my true passion. I started bow hunting when I was about 14, and you know, we've got a lot of wild hogs down here and a ton of whitetail, no real big ones, but lots of them. So got a lot of interaction with deer when I was really young. My dad, you know, he kind of showed me the ropes when I was little, and then just kind of turned me loose and said, go make your own mistakes and see if you can figure out these awesome creatures. And, you know, worked hard at it for years, and then, you know, went off to college and let the baseball thing kind of fizzle out. And then I actually started guiding. I started guiding waterfowl hunting in Mississippi and Arkansas, and I started, believe it or not, guiding some elk and mule deer hunts in eastern Oregon. I went out there on a hunt out of college, and the outfitter asked me if I would stay and learn how to call elk and help with some of his customers. So I started doing that.
Wow.
And then he introduced me to Safari Club International, you know, an organization being from South Carolina and from a pretty rural area. I didn't know, you know, much about Safari Club and anything, you know, of that nature. And he ended up, that guy that owned that ranch took me to a Safari Club convention, and I was introduced to that world. You know, you know, knew obviously all about Africa and dreamed about going over there. And so I started a hunt brokerage business. I saw, you know, several companies out there that were basically travel agents for hunters. You know, they would take a client that was interested in going to Argentina on a dove hunt or Africa on a safari and match them up, you know, with a really good proven outfitter. So I spent a lot of time, you know, traveling in the beginning and lining up the different outfits and that sort of thing. And that's kind of how I got started in the business. And it's grown quite a bit since we started literally in 2000. So we've been doing it for 16 years.
Wow. And so that seems to allow you a lot of flexibility to go on some of these hunts and kind of see some of these pretty neat places, huh?
It does. I worked in Africa when I really got going. I worked in there during the hunting season for about 6 years and ended up getting a professional hunter's license. And that, again, was the plan. I was going to book these hunts and then actually be the guide. And then, Mark, I don't know if you have kids or not, but we had I got married, had a son come along, and I kind of just got out of the guiding altogether, Africa and domestically, and just really focused on the brokerage of these hunts. And it just grew and grew. And I think, when you work at something for a long, long time, it gets a little better and a little better. And our business has definitely done that. We still got a long way to go, but it is, becoming more and more successful, and it's able to, afford me the opportunity to go on some hunts that I really thought I'd never, ever be able to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, with all the work you're doing with that, it sounds like you're still really involved with the whitetail game too. Can you tell us a little bit about, the kind of success you're having on big whitetails? It seems like you're still putting a lot of time and energy into that too.
Yeah, I'm on the Team 200 show. Adam Hayes and I have that show together, and I started out, a real good buddy of mine, Mark Beck, that owns a real estate company in Illinois. He got me hooked up with Matthews Dominant Bucks when they first started, and so I started working with that show, and then started working when Tom Miranda started the Whitetail Slam. I went in and did a couple seasons with that, and then did the show with Adam, the Team 200. And growing up in the South, whitetail has truly always been my personal passion, and especially bow hunting. And as I alluded to earlier, we've got a ton of deer, but we don't get the bone structure, the antler growth that they do in the Midwest, and so that, obviously that's just kind of where I gravitated to, and where a lot of people gravitate to really chase these giant deer around.
Yeah, it's hard not to be tempted to go chase those Midwest bucks, because there's something special about that part of the country. I can't deny that. But it's interesting, with you being from South Carolina and hunting the Southeast, we get so many of our listeners and readers and everything, they come from the areas like that, parts of the country, but so much of the hunting media today is all focused on the Midwest, and we talk about, Iowa and Illinois and Ohio and all that. But rarely do we get guys on here who have experience hunting down in the southeast part of the country. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, what makes that part of the country uniquely challenging or different than maybe what people are used to up in Illinois or Michigan or Iowa or whatever it might be?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. A lot of people aren't aware, especially of South Carolina. Like, for example, yesterday, our rifle season came in. You can rifle hunt. There is no limit on bucks. You can shoot you can shoot 20 a day. And our season goes from August 15th to January 1st. There's no limit on bucks. They do limit the number of does you can take. You have to actually get doe tags. Also, kind of a southern tradition is the dog hunting, and they actually, down in the parts of the low country in South Carolina, they still actually run deer with dogs, which is a pretty controversial thing, but they've done it for a long, long time, and that's still part of our culture and part of some of the hunting tradition in South Carolina. So, as you can imagine, the pressure that our deer are under, especially bucks and older bucks, it's insane. And I would argue there's more pressure on deer in the state of South Carolina than any other state out there. Again, we have a rifle season that comes in August 15th. It runs to January 1st, and you can hunt deer with dogs. You can obviously bait in the state of South Carolina, and there are a ton of people here that hunt. So the pressure is unbelievable, and to kill a 4.5, a 5.5-year-old buck with archery equipment in South Carolina is quite a feat. That is a tough thing to do, and truly, you get maybe 1-2 opportunities a year, because we have so many deer that do make it to that age class that are just 100% nocturnal, and you may get one crack at them a year, and if you don't make it happen, then it's just not going to happen.
So tell me this, Joe. What if you couldn't travel to the Midwest this year? You only were allowed to hunt your home state. How would you kill a mature buck in South Carolina this year?
Right. So how I would do it is I would use a lot of the same tactics that I use in the Midwest. I'm obviously a big trail camera guy to do an inventory on a piece of property. I personally don't go now into the swamps, into these big plantations that are hunted a lot. I will go around the county suburb areas and get a 20-acre, 30-acre, 50-acre woodlot that was maybe a development that fell through, and I'll seek out those places that gets zero hunting pressure, because there may be an ordinance where you can't shoot a rifle in there. Nobody's ever thought about it. It's overlooked. And then I'll set my trail cameras up in there, and every now and again you'll find a pretty smoker buck for South Carolina in a place like that, or at least a buck you can get a crack at.
Yeah, so it's all about finding those areas of no pressure, right?
Yeah, that's it, man, especially in South Carolina. No pressure and really the overlooked areas and developments that are kind of on rivers or right outside the city limits. Those things are gold mines, because you find out who the developer is. They may want a little bit for a lease, or they may just give you permission to go in there and look after the place. So those are a gold mine when you can find them. So that's what I will be doing some this year, and that is what I have done in the past. And so once I get that place locked in, I'll get my trail cameras in there and kind of do an inventory of what we got, and then start playing the game.
Now, what I've seen in Michigan, we've got a lot more hunting pressure than, say, Iowa. These deer here in Michigan they're very different than those deer in Iowa. They're much more spooky. They're much less apt to fall for something like calls or decoys or aggressive tactics like that. Are you finding similar things with those deer down in South Carolina, or is there anything else that actually makes their behavior different than some of these other well-known states?
Well, again, our buck-doe ratio is so screwed up. We have, in some areas, 20 doe to every one buck. So calling does not work really well in South Carolina. It hadn't for me. You can get a buck's attention with a grunt, but like you say, the big aggressive stuff, there's no competition for does. So they're just not really going to come to horns. If you see a buck out cruising and you grunt at him, yeah, he'll come over to you. But I'm with you. The big aggressive calling, that's not a tactic I use in South Carolina. I am all about the ambush and figuring out what that deer is doing, and then, strategically going in on certain days with certain winds that I know he's comfortable moving on and killing him that way, as opposed to going into somewhere like that and doing a whole bunch of aggressive rattling, calling, stuff that I may use in the Midwest. I'm definitely not going to use in South Carolina.
Yeah. It's funny, one of the things we hear a lot from people from that part of the country is that they can't relate to the types of terrain and habitat that we're talking about when we're hunting in Ohio or Illinois or Iowa. We're talking, okay, we got a bunch of big ag fields and fingers of timber coming out into it, and it's very clear where bedding areas and where feeding areas are. And lots of times I hear from folks down in the southern part of the country who say, hey, we hunt these great big pine plantations or big swamps. Like, I can't relate to what you guys are talking about at all. I mean, what kind of habitat are you seeing down in that part of the country, Joe, and how do you find deer in that? Because I imagine it's pretty different than the typical ag land that we hunt up here in the Midwest.
Yeah, it is. South Carolina used to be a big farming state, and it's really started farming timber. So you get tons of these big, like you said, pine plantations that are just acres and acres and acres of pine woods, and if that's all you've got to hunt, you hunt the opposites of what you've got. So if you or that's where you're going to find a deer. If you've got endless rows of pine trees, and then you've got a clear cut, your deer are going to be in that clear cut because that's where the food is. Or if you've got a little, you got a little spot of water, that's where you can find them. Where the smallest terrain feature is, the difference is where I tend to find the deer here in South Carolina. And again, even with like I was talking about earlier, these abandoned developments or whatever there may be inside there, if it leads out to to a little bit of crops, there are still some crops around Columbia. A few guys still grow some soybeans and some corn, and if you can find those areas, man, those are money.
Interesting. Now, you talked a little bit earlier about, if you were setting up on a property like this, you'd get your trail cameras out and let those start to work too. And I imagine you use that in conjunction with finding these habitat areas. But how do you look at trail cameras? I mean, how do you use them? Lots of guys have different ways of using them. Some people are super aggressive. Some people just take inventory with them, whether it be in South Carolina or in the Midwest. What's your usual trail camera strategy?
My first thing is to do an inventory, and here in South Carolina, I'll speak to that to begin with, or really any state where you can put out mineral or food sites or bait sites, whatever you want to call them. I like to do an inventory there, and even if it's a nighttime picture and I find a big buck, I mean, the first thing is to do an inventory on the property, because if you don't have a big one in there, especially after they shed their velvet, the only chance you got to kill one, a big one, is in the rut when you get a trespasser that comes over, looking for a hot doe. So the first thing is to do an inventory, and if I've got real good bedding cover and I get an earlier picture of that deer, then I'll start positioning my trail cameras a little bit differently, because I want to figure out exactly where he's bedding. I think that is, before the rut gets going, the number one key to killing a big deer. Well, actually, be the second key. The first key is having a big deer to hunt. The second key is knowing where he beds. So if you can figure out where he beds, 90% of it's done, because obviously he's going to get up out of there and move, and you can figure that out with trail camera. You put those in the likely transition areas that he's going to use, and you can figure out, based on when he gets up out of that bedding area and where he's going, how you can devise a plan to kill him. Another thing a trail camera will tell you that a lot of guys don't look at is wind direction. A lot of times you put the trail camera out, you get a picture of him. Okay, I got a picture of him. That's great. He was moving in daylight. Wonderful. But what they don't keep track of is what wind direction was that day. Where he's bedding. You got a daylight picture of him. You need to have a wind log so you can look at that trail camera and say, okay, it was Tuesday, 4:30 on August 16th. Well, you need to know what that wind was doing, because that deer was comfortable moving out of that bedding area in that direction with that wind. And when you can put that together, then the next time you're going to have a southeast wind, that he's more than likely going to be moving that way again, because he was comfortable, and you can figure out a weak length in where he's traveling, that you can maximize that wind and stack the deck in your favor. I mean, it's certainly not a guarantee, but that's a pretty good way to do it.
So when you're trying to figure out that bedding area with your cameras, how do you? I feel like one of the greatest challenges with that is getting those cameras out and being able to check them without spooking that deer and making him not use that bedding area anymore, or making him move less during daylight. How do you manage to balance that?
Yep, absolutely. I like to do it in the middle of the day when it's raining, and go in that way. Or, depending on where you have them set up, if it's on an active farm and there's a tractor moving around or trucks in and out of there every day, then I just copy what the farmers are doing, and I go in when they go in, I go out when they go out, because they're used to that. In South Carolina, it's pretty easy for us to find a bedding area, because it is the thickest, nastiest, unpenetrable place that you can find, and guaranteed that's the bedding area. The deer are going to be living in there, and you've got trails coming out of there. You can see the big tracks, and you don't actually have to penetrate the bedding area. We just want to know that there's a big one living in there. And I think even in the Midwest, like you said, a lot of big ag area and then some timber draws. Well, you can look at a map and see, all right, this is a thick timber draw, and then there's ag land all around here. This has got to be a bedding area, and you can set your cameras up on the fringe and then determine that he's bedding in there. And then I think, as you get a better moon, as you get closer to the pre-rut, the rut, the deer are more likely to get up, once they've got the velvet off their head and move a little bit more in daylight.
Yeah. So does that mean then that you hold off on hunting some of those spots till a little bit later than the year, or are you going in early season hunting in some of these areas?
As soon as I get a picture of a deer, now if I can hunt them in velvet, obviously, or when they're still patterned on beans and all that sort of stuff, you got to crack then, but I'm really not touching on that. But once they're out of velvet, if I get a daylight picture of a deer, once he's out of velvet and he's on a wind that I can hunt, I'm hunting him. I won't wait. If I have the right moon, I'm a big proponent of the moon, and if I've got a deer that I've got a daylight picture of, he's out of velvet, he's moved in daylight, and I get that same wind, and I've got a red moon, I don't care if it's in the second week of September or in the October lull. I'm going to hunt him then because he's shown that he's killable.
So that kind of situation, if you got a deer like that, are you and let's say hypothetically this is mid-October or earlier, we're not getting into the rut yet, are you typically going to try to hunt as close as you can to that bedding area, or do you like to stay off, hunt the food sources, and play it safe at that time of year?
It all depends on the deer numbers. If you've got a lot of deer that are coming out of this bedding area, you've got to be careful there. So that's not a simple question to answer because every situation, every deer will be different. Yeah. Is he coming out somewhere alone? If he is, then boy, I got a real good chance. If I'm set up on a field in October hoping he's going to get there before dark, and I've got 20 other deer in the field and I've got to climb down if he doesn't show up and I blow the plot up or whatever it may be. So every deer, every situation is different. And man, I think that's one of the reasons they're so fun to hunt is that, every one of them seems to be different. And you really, man, you got to live and learn. You got to try stuff and just remember and try and use common sense and look at every deer differently. I don't think there's one set way to do it. Because again, every deer is different, and every situation, every farm has got different features that will allow you to do different things.
Yeah, I 100% agree. To your point, that's probably one of the things that makes this so addicting, so much fun, is that it's always different. You always have to be learning. Every deer is unique. It's one of the greatest challenges in the world, as far as I'm concerned, trying to figure out these different deer. Every year it's new, and you start from zero and figure it out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, the beauty is when you have figured it out on a farm and another big deer shows up in that same area. You're so far ahead of the game, and a lot of times that happens. You find an area that you can get trail cameras in, find a big deer. He likes it. He feels comfortable there. There's something about that spot he likes. You kill that deer. A lot of times another big one the next year will move in there because it's the same stuff that buck liked and it's set up for him. Like the little 29-acre tract in Illinois. 3 years in a row, I killed great big bucks off of it, and it's just 29 acres, but it was something that was very, very little pressure in there. It was a thick place that fed out to a big ag area, and those big deer felt real safe in there, and I would only go in there at the absolute perfect time. And 3 years in a row, I killed a 164, a 186, and a 183 back to back to back, and it just, that area was set up perfect to hold a big deer. Now, places in Kansas or Ohio that I may hunt, I may not be able to keep the property. It may change every year. The farmer may cut timber on it. The crops may be rotated. Again, there's a million things that can happen. But when it's the same, and you have the a big deer that you killed in there, and the same thing happens the next year, you already know you're so far ahead of the curve that you ought to be slapped if you don't kill him, right?
It's definitely a better position than starting brand new, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about this small property, because there's so many people that hunt small properties. Most people aren't lucky to have hundreds and hundreds of acres in prime states. A lot of guys have got 20 acres or 40 acres or 10 acres behind their parents' house or whatever it might be. I guess first I'm curious, what do you think makes a good small property? Because I think that's, at least if you're in the process of trying to find a new spot and you only have small properties to pick from, finding the right small property can make a big difference, don't you think?
Without a doubt, and they're not all created equal. There's no question that there are two things that, in my opinion, make, or really three things that make a small property deadly dynamite, whatever you want to call it. The first thing is thick cover. Especially if you're after a big deer. That's the first thing. So if you have to go in there and hinge cut, or can get permission to do that, or it just happens to be CRP or whatever it is, thick cover is the number one thing I look for on a small property to hunt. The second thing is I stay out of there. No pressure. I don't want anybody to know about it. Don't want my friends to know about it. Don't want anybody to go in there ever unless it's me and it's for a real specific person. See, I think a lot of guys, they get a small farm and it's in their nature. They want to go hunt. They want to go out there. They want to go walk around on it. They want to walk in there and scout and see if there are any new rubs. Man, a 4.5, 5.5-year-old buck has found this little 30-acre sanctuary and thinks nobody's going to be in there bothering him. If you go in there, it's over. He is long gone. But it's almost like a little trap. That little, if you can convince him to get in there and bed, or that's a place that he likes to go and feels comfortable, then he's really, really, really killable. You just have to wait until the conditions are perfect. And that's the only time that you can kill him. Like on the 29-acre tract in Illinois, those 3 years that I killed those deer, the first one I killed on the second day I was in there. The second year I killed on the first day, and the third year I killed on the second day.
Wow.
And I had to wait. I hunted a day and then stayed out of there, and I'm away from my family and everything else. I had to wait 4 days before I could get back in there for a certain win. So it takes big time discipline, but the flip side of that coin is that most everybody can afford to get a small place. You don't have to have thousands and thousands of dollars to get these huge leases. You can, if you work hard, it's not going to cost you much, and you may get just permission to hunt in there. So that's the give and the take. It can be a deadly trap and make it really easy to kill a big deer, but you got to be real smart about it, and you got to work really hard to find it.
Yeah. Is this 29 acres? Do you own that, Joe, or is that lease? I can't remember.
I do not. That guy I was talking about earlier, Mark Beck, is the one that found that lease, and he let me hunt it for 3 years, and now he is actually going to take a turn and hunt it some, which I think is absolutely fair. I leased it. I want to say, I could be wrong here, but I think it was $750 a year is what it costs to lease it.
Wow.
And that was the insurance and the payment for it. So I mean, it is a good bit of money, but it's not near what some of these big tracts cost.
Right. I mean, if you pass on buying the new TV or don't go out to eat so much, you can save up that money in a year and put it towards something like that for sure. I think most people can do something like that, but it takes, like you said, hard work and choices, right?
Yeah, that's it. And in $750, if that's too much, you're just going to have to work even harder and find one that's $100 or $200, or that you can just get permission, to get into. Those are few and far between, but you can find them. I mean, they are out there. You got to network, and you got to get with these people and make it happen. You just can't say, man, I just don't have anywhere to hunt. If you really are passionate about killing a big deer, it's like anything else. The harder you work at it, the more successful you're going to be.
Yeah. I read somewhere that you're pretty serious, or maybe at least you were in the past, this article I'd read, pretty serious about how you go about trying to get permission on the properties that you really want to hunt. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you have gone about, finding places to hunt and getting that permission, or, access via lease or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think the whole thing is to be genuine, and really friend these people. I think that's been the key to my success in finding properties. Is like Mark, for instance, Beck in Illinois. I met him through a mutual guy. He happens to be in the real estate business. He had access to a lot of farms. He and I literally became buddies and we live how many states apart? I'm in South Carolina. He's in Illinois. Our relationship grew as buddies. Even though it was far away, he would come down and our families would go to the beach together. He'd stay with me during the summer. I would go out and hunt with him, and, our wives became friends. And it's a genuine relationship. The worst thing you can do is go in and try and use somebody to get a spot just to hunt. You don't talk with them in the off season. You don't stay in touch. That's not gonna. They're gonna turn it over to somebody else, or they're gonna see right through that. So I think being genuine is the main thing. I mean, let them know what you're after. But then, if they're in the NASCAR, man, get them some NASCAR tickets. If they're, if you live in the South and they like seafood, send them some shrimp. Really make an effort to be friends with them, and that's going to go a long way in acquiring, the different type properties. And then, also real estate agents, man. If I'm in South Carolina and I wanted somewhere to start, I'd do some research on where big deer were killed in Illinois, which counties. I'd call some realtors that maybe have some farms and stuff for sale and ask them, if there are any small farms or rural areas that allow hunting or dilapidated developments. I keep going back to that over and over again, but man, that's a great spot. Abandoned golf courses, man, you find something like that still got some grass growing there, man, that can be something too. You just got to think outside the box from what every other guy's doing.
Yeah, that's one of the topics that we get so many questions about. Is I think access is definitely just one of those issues that so many people deal with. It's tough to find somewhere to hunt if you're not born into a family that has a bunch of land. It's a big challenge. Do you have any typical way you go about actually going through the process of actually asking? I get this question a lot. What do you actually say? And I've got kind of, I do a lot of door knocking here in Michigan and other Midwest states, and I kind of have just a general routine now I go through in each place to kind of, introduce myself and chit chat and, explain what I'm trying to do. But I'm always curious to hear how other people go about it. How do you do that?
Yeah, for me, it's funny. Being in South Carolina, let's say that I'm going to Illinois for the first time to try and find a spot to hunt. That's what I want to do. Man, being from South Carolina, the Illinois folks look at us as a whole as being backwoods and, rednecks or whatever you want to say. And I would get in my truck and drive out there in the summer and go to different little diners where the farmers hang out, and I would start talking to them. I'd say, "Hey, man, I'm from South Carolina. Looking for a place to hunt out here. You guys got any leads?" In my case, they have found it really funny that I've come all the way from South Carolina to find a place to shoot a stupid deer, and they are so apt to help me. I'm not a local guy. That the families may have had feuds, or this person doesn't like this person. Hey, this guy's from South Carolina. He's serious. He's come all the way out here. I want to help the guy out. So I don't say I play the poor pitiful redneck, but I sure let it be known that I'm from South Carolina and I've come a long way and I sure could use some help. And that tactic really works.
I believe it. It is amazing how just one of the things that I found helps the most is, even if, I go up to a door and I knock on that door and this person says no for whatever reason, to your point, just continuing a conversation. and asking for their help. You know, do you happen to know anyone else I should talk to? It's amazing how many times that ends up being the way you find something that actually gets you access. It's just talking to people and asking for help, and it may not be on their property, but lots of times they can point you in the right direction, share with you a friend of a friend of a friend, and who knows where they'll take you.
Absolutely. I mean, you just can't take no. You got to keep pursuing it and come up with something that works. And if it works with a couple guys, you know, keep trying the same thing. I mean, the bottom line is you got to find somewhere to hunt, so you got to keep working at it.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Now, back to the small property thing. You talked about a big key to how you hunt those and how you have success on a small property like that is waiting for the right conditions. Can you elaborate in more detail on exactly what you're paying attention to? I know you mentioned moon. Would love to hear more about specifically what you're paying attention to the moon, and then any other conditions, weather, time of year, wind. I'd love to hear about the details on all that.
Yep, I'll go through, some actual kills. There are a lot of theories and ideas, but I guess if it's all right with you, I'll just relate it to those 3 bucks on that little small property.
That's perfect.
And go through exactly how I killed them.
Yeah.
First of all, the first deer we call Big Lefty. It's a non-typical on his left side, and he was a mainframe 5-point on his right side. But anyway, got trail camera pictures of him early after he was out of velvet, and a couple of them in daylight, and this was in September, October, because it was the beginning of football season, because Mark texted me the pictures and I was at a football game. So I know it was the beginning of September, October when he sent me the picture. So we knew there was a big deer in there. He was out of velvet, and he was not afraid to show himself in daylight. So I knew all that stuff. Then he started, becoming a little more nocturnal. The pictures we got were a little more nocturnal. And then all of a sudden he shows up again. Mid-October, he shows up again, daylight, and it's on a red moon, one of our overhead moons that the moon guide shows. And I saw the wind that he was on because I had a wind log for that property. Every day I would log the wind for that part of Illinois around that farm. So here I know 2 things. I know that he is cooperating with the moon guide, and I know that he's not afraid to move on this wind. It just so happened that I already had a stand hung perfect for that wind. I needed a northeast wind. He was really comfortable moving on that, and I needed a red moon. So I waited until the next red moon cycle was coming around, and I got in my truck and I drove to Illinois. Now, granted, nobody has been into this property at all other than to pull these camera cards, and that was done during rain, or it happens to be a hiking trail that comes through this property that some people use, and the deer are a little more accustomed to people going in and out of there, so that's even an added bonus to this property. So pulled the card. That was the only time anybody had been in there. There'd been no shooting lanes cut, nothing. The stands had been hung the year before, so there had been nothing in there. So I went in there. As soon as we got a northeast wind and a red moon, and I went in and I took actual replacement straps with me for that afternoon and replaced the straps on the climbing sticks and the stands as I climbed up, and I had plenty of shooting lanes. And the day I killed him was the exact day that he had shown that he likes to move. And nobody had been, I hadn't hunted in there, nobody had hunted in there, and it just worked out absolutely perfect, going with what the cards that he was showing. He showed that he'd move in daylight on a northeast wind, and he showed that he'd move on a red moon. And once I learned that, when that cycle repeated itself, I moved back in there. It also helped that it was towards the end of October, which they're a little more antsy then to get on their feet anyway. So that's what I look for. I mean, I don't know a tremendous amount about the barometer and the barometric pressure and all that stuff. I know Mark Drury's a big proponent of that. Mm-hmm. I do know that they tend to move, or my experience, and this is completely anecdotal, my experience has been on a high pressure afternoon. The bigger deer tend to get on their feet. I don't think I've ever killed a really big mature buck, in an afternoon on a low pressure day. It's always been on a high pressure day, and it seems like I see more deer on high pressure days than I do on really low pressure days.
Yeah, that seems to be a consistent thing that we hear from so many people too. Those high pressure days, rising and high barometer. That's pretty money. Can you elaborate on the red moon? We talked with Adam Hayes about this last fall a little bit, but we get so many questions still to this day. What exactly, whether you've got the moon guide or you're looking at this and you just know when the moon rise or set or overhead underfoot is, can you just explain again what this is, how it works, and why you pay attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, I know, man. I listen to your podcast, and I'll hop up on a soapbox for just a second, and I've heard the QDMA biologists talk about their studies showing the moon doesn't have an effect on deer and weather doesn't have an effect on deer. I'm gonna argue that, man. Auburn, I've read studies from Auburn done by Louisiana State University, Auburn University, and South Carolina DNR. They radio collared deer, and this is recent. This just happened, and there is proof in their study that the moon absolutely has an effect on deer movement. The radio collars, some of them last 3 months, some of them last 6 months. Some of them last less than that. And I don't think there's any effect. I mean, it's natural. The moon is a natural phenomenon that happens, that affects tides. It affects a lot of things. And in all of my experience, even when I worked in Africa, I had an old tracker that would come get us early when that moon was overhead during the afternoons. He'd come get us. In those days, we killed more than we ever, and we saw more on those afternoons. And that was absolutely, he was an old guy that had hunted his whole life in Africa, and he figured that out. So I don't, I would argue that the moon definitely has an effect on whitetail deer movement from a scientific point of view, where there are studies that show that it does have an effect, and from an experience in the field. And then, I'm going to skip over to weather for a second, because I heard that biologist from QDMA say that weather didn't have any effect on deer. Now, Mark, was he talking about any effect on deer throughout the year or only during the rut? I'm a little fuzzy there.
I honestly don't remember the specifics of the study that he mentioned, but to his point, one of the things he did say is, anecdotally, he and so many other hunters have seen the same thing as you and me, in that weather, moon, these things definitely do seem to. But there's got to be something with these studies that for some reason, maybe it is the time of year like you just mentioned, or how they're measuring increased or decreased movement, that just, because I think almost all of us have seen some of these things, noticeably correlated with increased daylight movement. It's hard not to believe that some of these things have some type of effect, but it's got to come down to the particulars of how these studies are done and what specifically they're looking to prove or disprove, maybe. That's kind of what I think.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I was laughing with Adam the other day. What we ought to do is say, all right, we'll pick two QDMA biologists, and Adam and I, and we'll get 1,000 acres, and we'll hunt it with the moon in the right weather, and let them hunt it when the moon is wrong and the weather's horrible, and see who is more successful. We ought to set that challenge up.
I don't think anyone would want to take those odds.
No, I wouldn't either. So, but yeah. Anyway, I'm not beating up on anybody too much. I've just seen too much, spent too much time in the woods, and just seen the moon affect deer. And it really is. It hasn't been my experience that the phase of the moon, or the fullness, or the half moon, or whatever, that in my experience, that has not had a tremendous effect. It's the position of the moon. When you get that moon overhead, the right time of year, the right time of day, that's the red moon, and those are the days that typically a bigger mature deer and deer in general are going to get up on their feet and want to feed. It's a timing thing, but it's the position and it's the gravitational pull that with that overhead moon and that underfoot moon that makes them want to get up more often than other times during the day. Now, obviously, deer are creatures of the gray. They're moving in the mornings, they're moving in the evenings. But when you throw in there good weather and you throw in there an overhead moon, man, and that's all you need is one little small bump in your favor, and you get it done.
Right, because we're talking about, in most cases, right, you're looking for when that moon time correlates with the last hour of daylight or so, or the first hour of daylight in the morning. Like you said, combining gray light with this increased influence of the moon, that's what might just get them out 5 minutes early, right?
That's exactly right, and the Deer Hunter's Moon Guide has done that. They put that thing together in the 90s, and it maps that out. And not only that, if you can't hunt that day, you absolutely can't hunt that red moon day. You've got to go another day. That moon guide will tell you, whether you need to hunt bedding, transition, or feed based on the moon's position for that particular day. You can hunt, and again, you're going to stack the deck a little bit in your favor by looking at that.
Yeah.
Because it times the deer when they're going to be where, and it's an inexpensive tool, man. They're $19, $20, whatever they are, but my goodness, the amount of money to spend on other trail cameras and leases and bows and everything else. I mean, this can actually that tool can actually help you determine when that deer is going to move, and you can have the best stuff in the world. If your timing's off, it's going to be for naught. It's just not. It's not going to work.
Yeah. If there's been anything that I've learned, in my kind of evolution as a hunter over the last 15, 20 years, and especially the last few years, now that I've been running the podcast and getting to talk to so many successful hunters, there's nothing more important, almost nothing more important than proper timing, because that's directly connected to keeping pressure low, which is maybe the most important thing if you're trying to kill big mature deer. So getting that timing right is so crucial, and so I pay, just like it sounds like you too, pay obsessive attention to all these different conditions that might just give me that 1% greater chance of the big boy walking through today, being out there during daylight. And if you line up a couple of those along with doing all of your other homework, all of a sudden you've got a 10% chance better that you might be able to get a shot on that day. And those little things make all the difference in the world as far as I'm concerned.
No, you couldn't have said it any better. And especially for a guy, like myself and other guys from the Southeast that travel to the Midwest, man, we are limited on time. If we know that the moon's going to be great the last week in October, we need to plan our vacation for that last week in October. If it's going to be the first week in November, we need to consult that moon and help it plan when we're going to be there. The weather can change and all that. It's hard to predict that far in advance. But, yeah, every little teeny thing you can do to stack the odds in your favor, you owe it to yourself for all the work you're doing to do that.
Yeah. Now, would you agree that weather still trumps the moon? So if you have a huge warm front push through and it's 75 degrees on November 1st, even if it's a red moon day, that's going to hurt you versus, having a cold front. Without
a doubt. I would go in this order. I would say pressure is your number one thing. If you've got a highly pressured hunting area, I'd rather have 5 acres to myself than 2,000 acres with 20 other hunters. Pressure is number one. Number two is weather, without a doubt. Like we touched on, high pressure, cold fronts, it being cold in general. And then the moon would be third. Mm-hmm. Those are the three, in that order of, in my opinion, the importance of deer hunting a particular place.
All right. So real quick, before we move on to our next question for Joe, we need to pause briefly for a word from our sponsors of this podcast episode, DeerLab.com. And DeerLab's a trail camera photo management and analysis tool that allows you to upload your trail camera photos online to DeerLab and then use it to better analyze and pattern your local deer. And this year I've been using DeerLab myself already to pattern the number one Michigan buck I'm after, a deer I call Holyfield. So with DeerLab, once I've uploaded my photos, the tool looks at the date and time for each photo and then automatically pulls in, all the weather factors that were present at that time. Things we've just been talking about, like barometric pressure, moon, temperature, all that kind of stuff. So then when I go back and look at these individual pictures, especially those daylight pictures, I can try and see what conditions were present at that time that might have influenced that movement. Even better though, DeerLab aggregates this data and helps me see those larger patterns through the reporting and profiling tools. For example, once I got all these photos uploaded, I took a look at which camera that this buck showed the most up on, and I found that was my front food plot camera. Next, I looked at the wind report for that camera, and when I did this, I had a really eye-opening experience. The report showed me that almost every time Holyfield showed up on this plot, including 8 different times during daylight, it was with a south or southwest wind. Like almost that was the only wind direction he was showing up on. And this was a massive realization for me because up to this point really, I would never hunt this area with those winds. If I hadn't seen this report, this information kind of visualized this way, that's what I would have continued to do. I'd keep hunting there with north and northeast winds, and I would have never seen them during daylight. So now that I've seen this trend, I've realized I need to figure out a way how to hunt there on those southerly winds. So now I've got a plan in place for how to do that. I'm going to move a ground blind in, and I think it's going to work out. But this really massive, major lesson learned, it would have never happened without using DeerLab. So if you're interested in trying out DeerLab yourself to better manage and analyze your trail camera photos, we've got a cool deal available for Wired to Hunt listeners. If you visit deerlab.com/W2H, you can get an extended 30-day free trial period and the ability to upload a larger number of photos for free, 250 photos in fact. So head over to deerlab.com/W2H to get this extended free trial and learn a few new things from your trail camera photos. It's free, it's easy, and honestly, it's very eye-opening. So with that said, check it out, and now let's get back to our next question for Joe, very much related to this topic. You mentioned earlier when you're looking at trail camera pictures to pay attention to things like the wind direction, and I think this is something I've been talking about a lot the past few episodes, is just the importance of always asking why. So like if you get a trail camera picture during daylight or you see Mr. Big during daylight, ask why. Look at all these specific things. Was the barometer high? Was it the right moon time? Was it because of a cold front? Was it the wind direction? And figure out what correlated with this sighting so that you can do exactly what you did with that buck. You looked at what the 2 factors were he did last time he was in daylight, waited for it to happen again, boom, you went in there, he acted the same way. I think that is such a key thing when you're trying to target these older deer.
Yeah, and another thing, I mean, that's exactly right. Look at the picture and ask why, but even more so than that, did the farmer just cut the corn? Did the farmer just harvest his soybeans? Did they just cut some timber next door? Look at everything that could affect the deer. Bam, he just showed up. Maybe he just got kicked from somewhere else. Did you hear about a buddy going in and walking his place or something? Every little thing. Any intel you can gather is going to make you more successful.
Yeah, so true. Can you tell us about that next buck? You told us about the first year. What about the second year? What was the specific situation there that you were able to capitalize on?
Same type stuff. That year, I do not think that we got any trail cam intel of that deer other than nocturnal pictures. We didn't get any daylight pictures of him, and I waited until the very end of October to go to Illinois, and I think I killed him on the 4th of November, before the rut got going, and I waited again until I had a northeast wind because I knew it had worked for that other buck, and I waited for that red moon, and that deer, I've got all 3 of these deer on video, by the way. That deer was actually bedded in the CRP, and I actually saw him stand up at 4:30 out of his bed, and I ended up actually snort-wheezing him in. But I saw him stand up out of his bed at 4:30 in the afternoon, 186-inch, 5.5-year-old deer in early November, and it was on a red moon afternoon with a high pressure. It was high pressure that day. It was cool, and it was getting colder. A little cold front was coming in, and we had a red moon that afternoon, and he got up, and I snort wheezed him right over to me and shot him.
Wow. So these are both examples where you traveling from South Carolina, Illinois, and from what I've seen, you do a little bit more hunting around the Midwest in addition to that spot in Illinois too. And there's a lot of people, I think, that have this type of situation where they've got their rut vacation week or whatever it might be that they've blocked off, and they're going to travel across the country or whatever it might be to their spot for the rut, and they've got 7 days or 5 days or 10 days. Can you share with us a little bit about what you found to be the keys to pulling off that kind of traveling hunt? You've got a short amount of time, relatively new place far from home.
Yeah, as a bow hunter and the experience that I've gotten, the rut can be tough for a bow hunter when they're running and they're under you 1 second, they're running past you another, they're all over the place. You see a lot of deer and it's exciting. But I haven't killed a lot of big deer in the prime of the rut. I think big deer-wise, the latest I've ever killed a really big deer was like the 10th of November, maybe the 11th, before the real break loose phase start. Most of my success has come from the end of October to the first week in November, that pre-rut time. So I look at that as the time to be there. And then if I want to tweak it a little more, then I consult, a moon guide and see when that red moon is going to fall during that time. And then bam, that's when I'll set my schedule to go. And I can do that, in April. I can look at a moon guide chart in April and determine when that red moon is going to be in October, 1st of November, and I can set my travel time for then.
Now, how do you plan a hunt? I don't know, this obviously is variable depending on the situation every year, but let's say you've got 7 days to go hunt this place, and maybe it's new. Let's say, like we were talking about earlier, you showed up, you met some farmer in the middle of summer, they end up giving you permission, you get to walk it really fast maybe when you're there in July, but now you're back in late October, early November, you got your 7 days. If that was you, do you dive right into the core, or do you hang on the outside and hang trail cameras and work your way in, or how do you approach that with, that 5-7 day time frame?
Well, everybody hunts a little different. Now we can cheat a whole lot because we have those text cameras. So if you put those, cameras, those covert or, reconics, a lot of people make the cameras that'll text or email you the pictures. So we can cheat. If we're out there in July, we meet the farmer, he lets us hang some cameras, we're going to know what's going on and what we need to do. Mm-hmm. But let's say you didn't have that. You didn't have a text camera. The farmer did let you hang some cameras. So you're going to have to plan your 7 days. You've looked at the moon guide. You're going out there in end of October, first week of November. Those are going to be your 7 days. Obviously, I get there. I will pull those cards. I mean, even if I have to go into the area, I've got to know. I've got to know what's in there, and I will get those cards. If the farmer and I have really hit it off, and I can get him to go in there on a rainy day and pull the cards out, or I got a buddy that can do it, pull the cards and mail them to me, or just email me the pictures of the good deer. You want as much intel as you can get, but let's say you can't do that. You can't do any of that. You don't even have trail cameras. So a lesson I learned from an old hunter, Miles Keller, is you hunt from the outside in. You've got 7 days to hunt. Man, don't bust right in there if you don't know exactly where that deer is bedding. You don't know exactly what trails he's using. Man, start out on the edges and hunt into him. I made a huge mistake in Canada one year. There were 2 stands hung between this bedding area and food source. One was kind of an observation stand, and one was, kind of the kill stand. And I was debating back and forth what to do, because I didn't have trail cameras. I didn't know where, how the deer were coming. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go into the kill tree. And I went in there, and darn if the deer didn't come through downwind of me. And it was a big 160-inch chocolate rack buck, and I blew it. Had I set up in that observation stand, I would have seen him do that. And this was early, so they were still doing the same things every day. And then I could have adjusted that observation stand and brought it in 60 yards, and I'd have killed him the next afternoon. But I blew it because I didn't hunt the outside in. So in simplifying that, hunting somewhere where you don't expect you're going to kill and you don't expect you're going to disturb anything, but you can see what's going on and tweak your setup from there.
Do you do any actual on-the-ground scouting? Like, I mean, other than just observing, like you just mentioned, do you actually go and look for sign, or is that something you're not as focused on?
I will do that. Again, every property is different. Every property can take different levels of stress. It depends on the property. You know, I like to hunt the outside in as much as I can where I can see. But then if it's dead, you know, and I've got a limited amount of time, eventually you're going to have to blow that property up. You know, you've got to get down into the nitty gritty. But I want to do that delayed as much as I can if I don't have that trail cam information. You know, that's obviously key. But again, I'm talking from a point that we're saying we don't have trail camera intel. Then what I would do, I would hunt the outside in. If I see something that I can move on, then I would obviously move on it. And if that's not working, then yeah, you're going to have to get down and you're going to have to do some walking. And in that case, I would do the old hang and hunt technique. You know, I would get a lone wolf and some sticks, and I would get down and I'd dive into the meat of it. But by golly, I would be, as soon as I found it, I'd set my stand up and hunt right then, and I'd be right back there the next morning. I'd hunt morning, afternoon, and if you don't get it done, break it down, move to your next spot, get on that hot, freshest sign, set everything back up, and get after it again. But I think it's important that people understand that when you do that, when you want to do the hang and hunt, you need to set it up, hunt that afternoon, and then I a lot of times will leave all my stuff in the tree and go back and hunt it the next morning, because what you don't want to have happen is you go there and hang it, you don't hunt that afternoon, that deer comes by there, smells where you've been, and it's over, and you never even knew he was there. Right. So hunt it that afternoon, hunt it the next morning, and then if it's dead and you've got another area you can go and look and hang and hunt again, then move out and do it again. Because you know, like you said, it's a limited time, and you've got to get it done. And if it's not happening that way, you've got to kind of force it, and eventually you're going to blow it up. You're either going to kill him or you're going to blow him out of there, and you know, hopefully you learn something.
Right, and at least you can say you tried.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right.
What specific sign do you look at as like hot, that yes, this is something I would hang and hunt over? You know, are you a guy that really likes scrapes, or is it rubs, or what matters? What is the sign that matters to you?
Again, I'm more of a terrain guy. Obviously, I look for all that. I think a ton of that sign is done at night. But if I'm creeping down a property I don't know anything about, and all of a sudden I'm getting to the edge of a big thicket, and there's some rubs and scrapes coming out of there that are, you know, extremely fresh, yeah, man, I'll throw up right there and set up a stand, hunt that afternoon, hunt it the next morning. And I'm more of a terrain guy. I feel like in that situation, the closer you can get to the thicket where they're coming out of the bedding area, the better off you're going to be. And so I love big scrapes. I love big rubs. All that's wonderful, but I still want to have the terrain right, and I want to have that thicket to be able to hunt, because if those scrapes and rubs are there and there's a giant bedding area, more than likely he's going to be in there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the scrapes, you know, they're done at night, and without, again, people call it cheating or whatever they want to call it. I call it using the tools that we've got. Trail cameras can eliminate so much of that, so I can't put enough stress on using trail cameras to do your scouting for you, or a lot of it for you.
Yeah. So let's say you did have cameras in this kind of situation while you're there. How would you, late October, early November, are you putting these on scrapes? Are you putting them on funnels? Are you moving them every couple days? How would you go about actually using cameras in that deal?
I have screwed up there too, moving cameras and trying to position them in season when I'm hunting, and having deer come by and smell them and run. The Team 200 show that aired last night was, I think it'll air again later this week, was of my Kansas kill in this past November. And you watch this buck come up out of this bottom with a doe, and I'd been in and checked that covert camera that earlier that day, and he smells it and cranes his neck around and looks at that camera, and he about blows out of there, but he's with a hot doe. And he ended up staying with her, and I was able to kill him. But that's man, I want those cameras in areas I think the deer are going to be traveling. And you know, if you set up again, everything is so different. To put that into a cookie cutter equation is difficult, because I can't say there aren't times that I moved the camera from a trail or a funnel area on top of a big fresh scrape, because I want to know what deer that was. Maybe he did it at night, but I know there's a booner in there now, and you know, hopefully the camera didn't booger him up, and I'm gonna concentrate on that area a little more. So yeah, I've done that, but theoretically or practically, you know, if you can put the cameras in there early and leave them and not move them around, the deer will get used to them. You know, I try and hide my cameras some or hang them a little higher than normal, because, you know, bigger deer, like you well know, man, when you mess with their bedroom, they can pick it out. I mean, they can find those cameras. So, yeah, again, every situation is different. But hopefully when you were there in July getting things set up, you put the cameras out. And if you can't get the farmer to go in and pull the cards for you on a rainy day, and you got to wait till you get there, or you just got to go in and check them. You got to know what's there. So you go in as scent-free as you possibly can, pull the cards, replace the card with another card, get out of there, do your inventory, and then see what you got, and then you can adjust from there.
How often would you check those cameras during the season? Is that like just once at the beginning, or would you every several days?
You know, again, and I hate to not answer things emphatically, but it just depends on what's going on.
Yeah.
If it's dead, I'll check my cameras more often. You know, again, I've got limited time I can be there. If I've got a giant Boone and Crockett in there that showed up in one time in daylight in the last 2 weeks, buddy, I ain't going to wait until time is perfect. I'm getting my butt out of there, and I'm going to go back in there when the time is perfect to kill him. Now, if I don't kill him, you know, within a couple of days, then I might check the cameras again, and you know what? I might move them around again because I've got limited amount of time. You know, with these guys that own these giant farms in Iowa and Illinois and live on them, you know, they can be a little more patient. But for a traveling hunter, you're going to have to be a little more aggressive, and you're going to have to do things a little more untraditional. And so, yeah, I mean, and that does break the rules, you know, to get in there and tromp up the place and move a camera to another area. You know, that does. But if it's dead for you and you're not seeing anything, nothing's happening, you can't just sit there and hope. You got to sometimes make it happen.
Yeah. That's tough. You got to know when to swing for the fences and when to hold back and wait, and making that decision is definitely one of the toughest in that type of situation.
No question about it. And again, that's why it's so darn fun. And you're going to make a mistake. I mean, you can't beat yourself up. I mean, I did that deer in Canada like that, and you know, I was ticked off about it for a little bit. But man, I learned. I won't ever do that again. And if I'm ever put in that situation again, I know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
So I learned the hard way. And so, yeah, you get in there and you tromp it up and you don't kill anything and you blow a big one out of there. Well, you know what? You learned and you just got to move on.
What do you typically now, on average, let's say you're, you know, walking through a property or heading to your tree stand or whatever, you spook a big shooter buck. You see him run off. What's going through your mind at that point? How do you adjust? Are you the type that goes and hunts right there, you know, bump and dump, or do you back out?
No, without a doubt, I'm hunting right there the next day. I'm hunting there right then. I'm gonna if I'm walking in to hang a stand, or I'm walking in to check the camera, and I jump a great big deer out of his bed, I am going to stop everything I'm doing. I'm going to set up a stand where I can shoot into that bed. And I'm going to make sure I've got the wind right on the direction I think he's going to enter back into that bed. I'm going to hope that he didn't smell me, but I'm going to hunt right there that afternoon, and I will be right back in there real early the next morning. So, yeah, the old Andre DeQuisto bump and dump, yes. Mm-hmm. I have not personally ever done that. I've never had a situation where I've done that. But if I did do that, that is what I would do.
Yeah, it's the old Andre DeQuisto move is legendary, and it's pretty interesting to think about, and it's a great way to take advantage of what a lot of people think is a really bad thing to have happen when you bump a big deer. But in this kind of way, you can take advantage of it because even though you spooked that deer, you just uncovered one of the most valuable pieces of the puzzle. You know exactly where he was bedded. So if you're willing to take advantage of that, it's kind of a Hail Mary, right? I mean, either it's going to work or you're going to, booger into his bedroom.
Yeah.
But
well, you messed him up. So the chances of you going around and finding another spot to kill him, you're just going to trump through more stuff and everything else. You've already done the damage. You've either done a great thing and he doesn't know what you are and he's going to be right back in there because his bed worked and he got out of there safely, or you've blown him out of the country, one of the two. So
yeah.
might as well give it a shot. But back to Andre, and I'll leave the moon alone after this. But Andre, and he wasn't paid by anybody to say anything. He was a big proponent of Jeff Murray's Moon Guide and using that overhead and that red moon. I mean, he was real big on that. If you look at some old vintage footage of whitetail addictions and listen to him talk about the moon, he was a big proponent of the moon.
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed too, and one of the reasons why I've, begun to pay more attention to it. And for me, I'm still trying to test the theory. I've heard a lot of people talk about how this can work. Some people say, well, I don't know. I'm at this point, trying to start correlating the data. Okay, matching up what I've seen versus what the moon was, paying attention to this. And either way, it's pretty fascinating stuff to try to pay attention to. But when you hear people like you or Adam or Andre or Dan Infalt or whoever it is who consistently are seeing this help them, it's hard to argue that there's not something there. So
sure.
I'm intrigued with it, and I need to get myself the guide for this year because I'm definitely going to be watching it. I'm curious, when it comes to that time of year in general, on average, what's your favorite type of rut setup, I guess? There's some guys that love bedding areas. There's some guys that want to be in your traditional pinch point. Do you have like a favorite? Like if you could pick the ideal rut setup, what would that look like?
I like the thickets, man. I like thick areas, CRP fields, thick areas. It seems like most all the big deer that I have killed have come out of CRP or out of thickets, and that's just from a personal standpoint. A lot of guys, the rut's going on, hunt where the does are. Yeah, but I think of the deer we're after, the great big ones. A lot of times they'll go into those doe areas, pick those does up at night, and then bring them into a thicket. Herd them in there and keep them into their, in their domain. So for me, I'm a big thicket guy when the rut's, about to get going or on the edges of the thicket. Again, I haven't had a tremendous amount of success during the heat of the rut. I've normally had my success pre-rut, but, obviously I've hunted my butt off during the rut. So thickets, all day sets followed by, real good funnels, and bottleneck areas, because, when those bucks are really out traveling, if you get them in between a doe, those all day sits and those funnels and bottlenecks can be really good. And, I've seen a lot of guys kill them on food plots where they come all the way out to the food plot and they're running the does around the food plot. I mean, I see that on Sportsman's Channel and Outdoor Channel every night. So, they kill them in the rut on those food plots too. But
it does happen.
But from a personal standpoint, and not having the luxury of a 5,000 acre plantation in Iowa with pristine food plots, I like a big gnarly thicket and sit there all day.
When it comes to those thickets, usually, do you like to be right in the middle of them, or are you usually hunting downwind of them, waiting for something to cruise downwind and try to smell them out?
Yeah, that, and I don't like to get right in the middle of them because I got to get out of there at some point. I like to hunt on the edges of them where I can see over into them, be able to call it something if there's a buck coming through there alone. I don't like to get right in the middle. And I will look at it from a map standpoint and then figure out where I think the deer is going to be coming from and get the wind right, especially if he's coming by there. You know, he's going to enter that where the wind's in his favor. You know, he's going to scent check it, want to check for hunters, want to check for predators in general, and wanting to find a hot doe. So he's going to use that wind to get into that thicket, and of course you've got to pay attention to that. But yeah, I don't like to get in the absolute middle of it. That's not my speed.
Yeah. Like you said, that's an interesting thing you brought up too. Like the whole access issue, access and exit. That's such an important thing that sometimes when we start talking about the rut, I think people kind of throw that out the window and stop worrying about access and exit and making sure you've got a stealthy way to get in and out. But do you still pay attention to that? Is that something that's important to you even during that period of time when deer are a little bit crazy?
Not super. I mean, again, I want to not like early season when enter and exit or pre-rut is so important. When the rut's going just haywire, crazy, you know, you got to get in the right spot, and if that means giving up a little bit on your entry and exit, that, you know, by all means, you know, you got to get in there, and if you're going to be sitting all day, you're only coming in, you know, and out one time. And so I still think you need to pay attention to it, but that doesn't need to be the number one factor.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've seen too. It seems like when you're ranking those things in order of importance, it shifts during the rut a little bit. And like you said, you've got to be in the right place. In a lot of cases, right, you might spook some deer in the morning walking in, let's say, if you've got a subpar access route. But the buck that's going to roll through there at noon, maybe, he might have been a mile away. So
exactly right.
It's
exactly
very
right.
different.
If it looks good, man, don't not hunt it because you can't get into it during the rut.
Yeah.
You know, get into it, take your lumps, and then get ready for the mid-morning, middle day, early afternoon, evening hunt, and you're already where you need to be.
Yeah. So, what do you have? Where are you hunting this coming fall, Joe? For whitetails.
I am leaving. Yep, I am leaving the 30th of August, and I'm flying up to Edmonton, Alberta. I've got a buddy up there that has some really good property that's north of the bow zone and close to the Saskatchewan border. He does do some outfitting. So I'm going to hunt with him for 7 or 8 days, and we're going to hunt mule deer in the mornings and whitetail over alfalfa and canola in the evenings. So that's my first hunt. And then depending on, I've got cameras in Illinois, got cameras in Kansas that are already going and showing some pretty good deer. You know, waiting for Velvet to get off to see what's going to happen there. So I'll be hunting Illinois and Kansas during the pre-rut, you know, rut time frame, and even before then, if something big, hard-horned is daylighting. And then I always finish out the year in Texas. I take my son down to Texas, and he rifle hunts, and I bow hunt. We've got a little lease down there, this free range, and it's a lot of fun. There aren't a bunch of giants on there, but there are a bunch of nice deer, and I love hunting with my son. He's 12 now, and so that's a real special time for us, and so that's where I'll finish out the year.
Sounds like a great set of plans there. It's gonna be a fun year.
Man, I'm excited. I can't get here soon enough.
And it's gonna be here soon, August 30th. We are not far from that at all. I leave just after that for my own early season whitetail trip, and I'm just beginning to panic a little bit because I'm not sure I've got everything ready. So got to get some final things done.
Man. Yeah, I know the feeling. It's it'll be here before we know it, and the bolt heads need to be sharp, and the bow needs to be tuned. There's no doubt about it.
Yep, got to be prepared. So, a final question for you, Joe. You know, being a member of Team 200 and hanging out with people like Adam and all those guys and all the other, you know, successful hunters I'm sure you've been able to be around, is there anything that you've found that all these most successful hunters you know have in common, or that they do differently than the average hunter? If there's anything in addition to what we've already talked about.
Yep. It is really, really simple. I think a lot of guys get to the same level of hunting prowess or hunting skill. I don't think that there's some superhuman hunting ninja that's so much better than somebody else. I think a lot of guys have the same level of hunting skills, and it is a skill you develop. But I think a lot of people can get there. The difference I have seen to the guys that consistently kill really big deer is they work extremely hard at it. They run it, and financially too, man. They sacrifice. They've got the trail cameras, they've got the leases. They're not necessarily rich men by any stretch. I hear that and it makes me so mad. But he's just rich. He's hunting in the best areas. That's not true. Some of the best whitetail hunters I know are very, very blue collar, humble means guys, but they sacrifice financially and they work their butts off to kill these big deer. They're constantly looking for new places. They're constantly out scouting in the summers, glass and bean fields. They're spending, all they can spend on trail cameras and getting into the best properties they can get, but they're working their butts off. So if there's one common denominator between all the good deer hunters that I know and have associated with, they work really hard at it.
I'd have to say I've seen the same thing. There's some things that there's not any kind of secret tactic. It's just simply putting your time and energy where your mouth is and putting in the work.
That's it, man. Common sense, really studying what's going on and working hard, and you'd be absolutely as good as any other hunter on the planet.
Yeah. So, Joe, if people want to learn more about what you're doing with the hunts, the brokering there, or watch your episodes on Team 200, where can they go find that stuff online?
Yeah, my company is Sporting Adventures International, and the website is sportingadv.com, like Alpha David Victor, short for adventures. So sportingadv.com is my website for my company, and then 200inch.com is the Team 200 website, 200inch.com, and a lot of the episodes post up on there. And then obviously the show is running now at 7:30 on Monday nights on the Sportsman's Channel right before Monday Night Football, once that gets started. And then it runs a couple times later in the week as well. So if people just keep over the show or record it, they'll be able to see it. But it's a pretty cool show. Got a lot of big buck killers on there, and man, there's a lot of big deer hit the ground with archery equipment on that show, and I'm just proud to be part of that team.
Yeah, a lot of good guys, it seems like, and I've enjoyed all the episodes I've seen myself. And to your point, I think 2 of your seasons, or most of the episodes from 2 of the seasons, are online to watch, for anyone, whether you've got cable or not, or whether you've got, the time to watch the scheduled airings. So definitely check that out, guys. I'll make sure to put links to all that stuff in the blog post for this podcast too. So, Joe, this has been great. Really appreciate you spending some time here chatting.
No, Mark, I appreciate it too, man. Good luck to you on that hunt, and let's keep in touch. I want to see some great pictures this year.
Sounds good. Hopefully I'll have some good stories, and you'll have some good stories, and we can bring you back on to talk about how everything we talked about here today led to a couple big deer on the ground.
Man, I've got my fingers crossed. Thank you, buddy.
All right, Joe, have a good one. All right, so there you have it. A lot to digest, but really helpful perspective, I think. So a couple quick reminders before we go. First, be sure to check out what we're doing over on the 100% Wild podcast. That's my shorter form podcast with the Drury's, in which we answer listener-submitted deer hunting questions. And that show is really coming into form. We're trying to make some tweaks to make it even more fun and educational to listen to. So be sure to check that out throughout the season and in the coming weeks. And submit your own question, too. We would love to listen to it and try to answer, too. So also, we need to thank our partners who help make this podcast possible. So thank you to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Maven Optics, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And speaking of, also be sure to check out that free trial with DeerLab over at deerlab.com/W2H. That's deerlab.com/W2H. So, with all that said, thank you all for joining us today. I hope this one was helpful, and I hope you will stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.